Welcome to the Nurse Mark Podcast, where we talk about everything health, happiness, cannabis. We'll delve into all aspects of what it means to live a powerful, healthy life. Everything from exercise to nutrition to mindfulness, and how to use cannabis as a means to alleviate some of the most common health issues we face. My motivation and passion come from the fact that I personally had to explore all these areas to deal with lifelong depression and mood disorder. For me, it's personal. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Welcome to the Nurse Mark Podcast. This is your host, Nurse Mark. This week's episode is all about sex. We're lucky to have as our guest Dr. Jessica O'Reilly. She's a sex and relationship expert and the founder of Happier Couples, Inc., which provides relationship education online and via retreats to couples across the globe. You're going to love this episode. We talk about all things sex related. And let's face it, it's what drives the world. It's what we're all about. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. And we're live. Welcome to the Nurse Mark Podcast. And my guest today, Dr. Jess. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And happy to have you here. So we actually have met. We had an event at EO Boston Entrepreneurs Organization, and you were kind enough to come down and do a Valentine's Day event around sex. And it was such a great time. It really was. That was the highest rated and probably the most attended event all year at EO Boston. Yeah. And so
all you've got to do is bring sex into the equation. And people entrepreneurs are like, oh, I remember that.
Yeah, I know.
We'll talk about that.
Right. I remember sex before I tried to start a company.
Right.
Yeah, who doesn't like to talk about sex? Maybe some people, but generally when you mention sex, people's ears perk up and they're like, what are we going to talk about today? This is going to be really interesting. So
whether they like it or don't like it, they're listening.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. It's like politics. People are always willing to talk, even though they might not be in the same place.
Right.
So here we are. We're going to talk about sex today. Yay! And I'm on the side of people who I love sex. So I like to talk about it. I'm really open about it. And, and much to the dismay of my children, I am very open about it.
All the research says they'll be better off if you're talking about it, right? I just saw a study saying that the effects of porn, for example, are mitigated and you don't have the adverse outcomes from porn and sexually explicit media if parents are also talking to their children about sex. So porn and explicit media, in fact, is not to blame. It's an absence of comprehensive sexual health education and dialogue that leads to sexual issues and, sexual behaviors that perhaps are not the most desirable.
Now see, this is great. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about porn and the media and what's prevalent today versus, maybe when I was growing up, porn was a magazine. You had to physically find the magazine underneath somebody's bed, right? And that was how you accessed porn. Today, that's not the case. I mean, it's like, it's in everything. I mean, everywhere you look, it's going to be sex. And as it should be, we are sexual creatures. We are physical beings. And it's a huge part of our lives through the whole, from the moment we figure it out till the end. I mean, it's a thing, right? Just look at Viagra. Viagra sales are off the charts because people just want to continue in their issues. So anyway, how did you get into sex and being, this is your business, this is your life, your passion? Yeah. How'd you get here?
Well, I guess there were 3 stages. When I was a little kid, I just wanted to grow up to be a clown who made balloon animals at birthday parties. And then I outgrew that. And, I had gone to school thinking I would probably go into law, probably go to law school. And then I ended up deciding to teach. I had done a volunteer and an internship position in a high school, and I obviously believe very strongly in the public education system and its effect on young people's self-esteem and sense of self-worth. Mm-hmm. And here I'm a Canadian, so our public education system is well attended and quite strong. Mm. And so I was teaching in a local high school here in Toronto, an alternative school, and I saw the cost of a failing sex education system. I saw the costs of teachers not having the supports they needed to support young people with the issues they were facing. So I had students coming to me with unplanned pregnancies, students coming to me because their condom had broke, students coming to me who were already in unhealthy, abusive relationships in their teens. Students not knowing how to navigate non-intimate relationships that were abusive. Some of them had parents who were physically and emotionally abusive of them. And so when we say sex education and when we talk about sex, we're also talking about human rights. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about communication, self-esteem.
Boundaries.
Boundaries, absolutely. What people are, well, why would we teach young people about consent? We're not just talking about sex itself. Consent relates to our bodily autonomy, right? To whether or not I want to put this thing in my mouth. I'm talking about food here from a young age, or whether or not I want to have a hug or engage in a specific activity. So sex intersects with almost every area of our lives. And I went back to school to study it to support teachers in the public education system. So that's my passion. That's what I continue to do on the side on a volunteer basis. I train the teachers here in Toronto who are in Teachers College because only 15% of teacher preparation education programs across Canada back when I was studying, only 15% offered mandatory training in sexual health education. So teachers were just being thrown into the fire and being told, hey, teach the subject that's personally difficult, that really is divisive and upsets parents, but also we have no supports for you. So I wanted to be part of, changing that.
Mm-hmm. And it certainly needed to be changed. I can't recall if I ever had any public education around sexuality and sex. Maybe one time, and I think it might have been church related. So it was kind of a different, to their benefit. They were trying to give some education around unplanned pregnancies, right? So it was kind of really light. And my conversation with my dad, the only conversation I had with either of my parents was about a 30-second conversation. He was like, you know about condoms, right? And I'm like, yeah, Dad, I know about condoms. I was like 14. That was it. That was all the education. So yeah, I mean, it's important to have that in the public school system. I really think that that's true.
Well, and we have all the data that supports the fact that comprehensive sexual health education, which includes, by the way, a discussion of abstinence as part of safer sex and pregnancy prevention. But we know that this does not lead to early onset of sexual activity. We know that it increases the chance of enacting healthy behaviors like using condoms or speaking up about your boundaries. So we know that talking about sex doesn't make people go wild when it comes to sex. It helps people to figure out what feels right for them. And ultimately, at any age, we need to empower people to make those decisions because you're not at that party late at night with your kids holding their hands. And you can't stop young people from accessing information. And perhaps when we were younger, it was a little bit easier, although we still found it, let's be honest. I mean, I grew up at the age where we did have the internet in high school. It wasn't like it is now. We didn't have it on our phones, but we still access that information. And now we're in a different era, the digital age, obviously. Young people have more access to images, to data, to videos than ever before, but they lack the context. We can't assume that they can go learn about it on Google. We need to say, hey, what do you know? How do you feel about that? Do you have any questions? How can I help to fill in the gap? And yeah, are young people going to cringe when their parents talk to them about sex? Many. That's okay, though. It's better to have a cringy conversation that results in some positive and accurate information being shared and creates an opening for them to come to you in the future than to avoid it because it's uncomfortable.
Right. And I think that's a lot of the time, it's the avoidance of that uncomfortable conversation. And you know what? They're going to get information. We're all going to get information one way or another. So what way do you want it? You want it to be in the context of, hey, sex is natural. It's going to happen. but let me give you my experience on, how this rolled out for me or however the conversation goes. So you have done a lot in the world of sex. So you've been you're out there, you're well known, expert on the subject. And so talk about some of the different things that you've done in this area to kind of open up the conversation for people. Like our event, you had time with the guys and you had time with the girls and then you had time with everybody together. So it was sort of a breaking down of barriers, I think, at first. And then it was like everybody's in the room for some pretty open, honest conversations that you normally wouldn't experience at an event. And it was all entrepreneurs.
Right. So I often say that my job is ultimately to start conversations. So I only had a few hours with your group. And I remember your group because I was on a tour with an organization and I was in, I think, 10 different cities in 14 days. And they were just 3 or 4 hour events. Yeah. And what I'm trying to do is to help people better understand your own needs, because I don't think many of us have really been asked, well, what are your sexual values? How much does sex matter to you? Mm-hmm. And if we haven't addressed that for ourselves, how do we explain it to a partner? No, what usually happens is you fall in love, things are exciting, and then all of a sudden you commit to being monogamous for life, but you don't know if in 5 or 10 years, one partner is going to say, you know what, sex doesn't really matter to me. I don't really want to have sex anymore. Oh, also I want you to be monogamous. So I've chosen to abstain, therefore you have to abstain. And so if you flip it to the other side, if I were to say to my partner, I want to have sex, I insist on having sex with you, that's not fair. Obviously, I cannot put pressure on my partner to have sex with me. And at the same time, why should I be allowed to, on the other side, the flip side, say, no, you can't have sex anymore because I'm not interested and I don't want you having sex with anyone else? And I bring this up because if you don't know your own sexual values, if you haven't thought about your own sexual desires, boundaries, proclivities, there's no way you can communicate those to your partner from the onset and then build a sexually compatible relationship. So I'm helping people to better understand what they need, better communicate their needs, desires to their partner. And part of that communication is to really listen and try and understand and be supportive of what your partner needs, whether you have one partner or you have 10 partners. And so, I've been really lucky. I started off with Playboy TV, actually, working on a show about swingers where I was, there were a bunch of swingers living in a house, and every weekend I'd bring in a new couple who thought they might want to try it, and I'd walk them through the process, then I'd leave them and they'd have their fun, and I'd come back the next day and debrief. So that was a big part from the entrepreneurial side, but I did a lot of learning in that house as well, because these were real people with real stories, and I've never seen an environment in which people are so clear about their boundaries and desires, so emphatic about consent. So you don't just, if you go to a regular nightclub as a woman, for example, you might be dancing and then you feel someone kind of pushing up behind you. No one asks you if you want them to grind on you from behind. But in this swing house with Playboy, they would say, is it okay to touch you? Do you want to dance with me? Are you into this? How do you feel about this?
Conversation about the boundaries.
Exactly.
It's part of that lifestyle. I have friends that are swingers, and it's very much about that. It's like, okay, who is okay with what?
Yeah, absolutely.
Up front. Yeah. And it's actually, if you think about it, I mean, this whole podcast that I do is, about health and happiness. And so sex is about both of those things. And I can see, at least looking in relationships that my friends have, let's say they're in a married monogamous relationship, and one of the partners will be not monogamous without the other partner knowing it, right? Because they say, well, my partner isn't into whatever it is that I want to do. The problem is that they've never had the conversation. Like, they don't have that kind of a relationship where they can speak freely about what their proclivities are. Like, what do they like in sex? They feel like they can't have that conversation. But rather than have the conversation or end the relationship, they just go and do whatever it is that they do. And then inevitably it blows up, or most of the time it blows up, and then it's this crazy thing. So why is it so hard for people to actually have that conversation? What is it that makes it so difficult?
Part of it boils down to sex is a thing that we do and not a thing that we talk about. So part of it is communication based. But I think the other issue is monogamy as a default setting. And monogamy can be a wonderful thing. It works for so many of us, but it doesn't work for everybody.
Right.
And there's new research in terms of sexual personalities that it's better suited to some versus others. But the bottom line is we all get in, almost all of us just get into a monogamous relationship. We fall into it because we kind of think we have no other choice. And so I think that not only do we need to improve the way we communicate, we need to change the way we think to understand that you can custom design your relationship from the onset. In fact, people say, oh, well, when should you have that conversation about monogamy? I say on the first date. If you don't want to be in a monogamous relationship, be open about it. And you talked about friends who are being non-monogamous, but without consent.
Right.
Whereas we know now that 1 in 5 daters in the United States, 1 in 5, 20%, has been in a consensually non-monogamous relationship. We know in Canada that 12% of Canadians say that an open relationship, meaning consensually non-monogamous, is their ideal relationship format. That is a lot of people, millions of people, but we don't talk about it. We live in shame. We're forced into the shadows, into secrecy. So I think that, yes, we have to work on our communication skills, but we also have to be a little bit more introspective about what it is we want. You know, this morning I was on a morning show here in Canada talking about celebrity relationships and what we can learn from celebrity relationships. And one of the things I think we can learn is that if you keep making the same mistake in relationships, you look at some of these celebrities who keep cheating on their partners, right? And it keeps ringing out in the headlines. If you continue to cheat, maybe you need to acknowledge that you don't want to be in a monogamous relationship, and that is okay.
And it is okay.
Loving, tender, lasting, fulfilling, consensually non-monogamous relationships too. So we need to break down the stigma so that even if it is for the minority, let's say it is only for somewhere between that 12 to 20%, we're talking about millions and millions.
I was just going to say that even though you're saying it's 12 to 20%, that's a huge number. That's a lot of people who are saying, hey, it's okay with me. You know?
Yeah. How many people are left-handed? Probably not 20%.
Yeah.
I don't know the data on that, so you can call me out if I'm wrong. But you know what I mean? We accept variation in other areas, but not in sexuality. Now, when it comes to communication, you asked, how do we improve it, or why is it so difficult? I think it's because we wait until we're frustrated to speak. And we need to have more preventative conversations. So when I was working with your group, it's not that anyone in the group came specifically because they had a problem. They came to this event because they're top performers in life and they want to be top performers in their relationship too.
Yeah.
You realize that you have to invest in your relationship before the problems arise. And that's how you cultivate happiness, longevity, fulfillment, and compatibility. And so when it comes to communication, I think we usually wait till we're angry or frustrated or just, let down. And then we end up complaining instead of communicating. And so I often say when we're talking about sex, can you break it down into 3 parts? Can you start with the positive or start with a compliment? Can you make an offer or ask a question? And then you ask for what it is you want. So let's say, I'll take something really simple. Like, I want my partner to kiss me more. So I hear a lot of this in long-term relationships. We start making out. So people will say, oh, well, my husband never kisses me anymore. Okay, if you go to your husband and say, you never kiss me anymore, do you think that's going to make him want to kiss you? Whereas if you go to them and say, oh man, the way you kissed me the other night felt so good. And so that's your compliment or your positive. And then you say, maybe you ask a question and say, is there anything I can do for you? And then you make your request and you say, can you kiss me like that every morning? Because it would just start my day on the right foot. Who communicates that way? No, we don't. We go and say, you don't kiss me anymore. Right. You don't do the movies, or, you don't go down on me enough. Instead, tell them why it feels good. Talk about, in business, we often talk about the benefits as opposed to the features, right? More, right?
It's just another sales job.
If you kiss me more, I'll want to go down on you more. If you kiss me more, I'll have more sex with you or whatever, or I'll feel closer to you.
Right. Yeah, see, and absolutely going to be more inviting on that one. So it's the context of the messaging. It just still amazes me that there's such a stigma about sexuality. I mean, I'm glad that we have the gay community who has really pushed forward sexuality in a very positive way. In the transgender community, we're having many more conversations about being accepting of whatever anybody's into. and I just, you know what, I applaud that, and I'm joyful when I hear that and I'm being part of that conversation. But there's still, I'm single, and so I haven't been dating recently, but I did a lot of dating, and and there were times, like there are periods of times, I've been divorced for like 10 years. There are periods of times during that period where, I was definitely not into a monogamous relationship, but I found it really difficult to go out like on a Bumble date and start the conversation up. Well, I'm not really looking for a monogamous relationship. I didn't want to mess the situation up. So it's hard to have that initial conversation with someone about that subject. But how do I know that they're not thinking the same thing?
Exactly.
How do I know? I'm assuming.
Yeah. And I'll go back to discomfort. Go ahead and have uncomfortable conversations, because the fruits of uncomfortable conversations are so much juicier, are so much more exciting, are so much more authentic than just faking your way through. And I hold no judgment, because I do know that the stigma makes it very difficult, right? You don't want to be rejected right away because you identify as polyamorous or you identify as consensually non-monogamous, because we all fear rejection. Rejection doesn't feel good. Rejection, is part of this. It's believed to be part of this evolutionary mechanism, because we've always depended on one another in order to survive. And social rejection meant death. It meant your life was at risk. And so, even in the little contexts, we don't want to walk up to someone if we don't think they're interested. We don't want to open up about our own sexuality if we feel we're going to be judged. And this also brings us back to compatibility, because if your partner and you want two very different things, you can find a way to make it work. But if what you want leaves them judging you, if they respond to your desires or your boundaries or your interests or proclivities with judgment, that's when I think you're going to be running into an impasse when it comes to compatibility.
I have had relationships end just because of that. Just because of that. It was a double standard and it was difficult. So I had a conversation with a friend of mine. She's 33, just had a relationship end because the guy cheated, right? And she said, this happens to me all the time. And she made a statement. It's like, all of my girlfriends, we all know guys cheat and girls don't. And I thought about it. I'm like, no, wait a minute. That hasn't been my experience, because I've been cheated on before when we agreed it was a monogamous relationship and it wasn't on the other side. And so is there data that says guys cheat more than girls or girls cheat more than guys? I mean, what's the deal?
So historically, men have cheated more than women, but women are now closing the gap. And so
yes,
hey, equity, cheating, equity. Well, there are a number of reasons for that. So if you are more relegated to the private sphere, like if we look back in history when women were more likely to be in the home, they had less opportunity to cheat. There is greater stigma for women who cheat, because just our sexuality in general, if we are sexually expressive, if we're sexually desirous, if we want sex, we face a different type, often a more intense social stigma.
Absolutely. Still.
Men face another one, though. What if you don't want sex? What if you're not as sexual as your partner? What if you're one of those people that really ties sex to emotion? Men get judged for that. And so I think what we need to do is, first of all, eradicate gender norms, but also
please, can we do that?
Create more space for people to just be who they are, regardless of what's between their legs or regardless of how they identify when it comes to gender. So women are cheating more. Cheating is more common than we realize. So it's really interesting. If you look at the data suggests, if you look at kind of an aggregate of studies, it's around a quarter of people who admit to having cheated. But that number is higher. Just from our own experience, and I was wondering this, and I don't know if this is true, this is just an anecdote that's on my mind. I wonder if when men cheat, they might be more likely to admit it in survey research, whereas women, we might be more reticent to admit it because we face so much social judgment and we judge ourselves. Right. So I wonder if the self-report is skewed by gender norms and gender pressure. But a lot of people cheat. And cheating, obviously, when you say you're going to do something, when you make a commitment, you should try and follow through on that commitment. Having said that, we all lie. We all break commitments. We all let people down. We all screw up. And we put cheating at the very top of the transgression hierarchy. Like, there is nothing you can do worse than having sex with someone else or kissing someone else or flirting with someone else, whatever your definition of cheating may be, than other than perhaps physical abuse. And here's the thing. Most relationships that we see that have lasted decades and decades and decades, many of them would not be here if they just called it quits as soon as someone cheated.
Absolutely. I'd say the majority of them have had an indiscretion once, twice, or whatever during that course of time. And the fact that they were able to communicate about it over a period of time and stick with it, yeah, that's how the relationship lasts a long time. It's not like all of these 50, 60, 70-year marriages or whatever didn't have things happen in them, right? It's more
exactly. And I think about
get over it.
We hurt each other in so many different ways, okay?
Right.
And I'm not saying it's okay, but we're human, so we hurt one another. Why is it that cheating is the ultimate hurt? And it has to do with social stigma. Again, if you stay with someone who's a known cheater, you get judged. And so we don't even know what we want. We sometimes feel like we have to leave because everybody knows about it, right? Sometimes the social shame can hurt as much as the cheating itself. And I'm not trying to minimize the effect or the impact or the feeling around cheating.
Oh my gosh, it's awful.
Of course.
You have this agreement, and you've said, okay, I'm going to close it down and I'm going to be with just you. And then you find out that wasn't the case. I mean, being on that side of it, and I've been on both sides of that equation, by the way, and it's hurtful. It is. It's hurtful. It's painful. Yeah.
And I like that you say you've been on both sides, because I think there's this idea that there are good people who don't cheat and bad people who do cheat.
Right.
The reality is, it's not about being good or bad. It's a specific decision and a specific behavior. And you are at a
specific time. Right. So always, once a cheater, always a cheater. I disagree. It's specific to a time and a place and a circumstance. And I've been in monogamous relationships that were very long periods of time. And then I've, other times not.
Of course. I mean, think about all the mistakes you've made in your life. It just because you do them once, twice, 3 times doesn't mean you're going to do it again and again and again.
Right.
I mean, we do not apply the absurd, I think, idealistic or moral standards to any other realm of our lives that we apply to sex.
I know. What the heck is it? I mean, is it just this long history of sexuality between men and women and society? And I'm like, there's always been that sort of in the background. Women are going to be good and not cheat, and men are just going to get out there and do it. I mean, it's been the conversation.
That's one way to control female sexuality too, to sort of mute our pleasure and say, well, women only have sex for baby making, to keep a man, for love, for romance, for connection. Instead of just acknowledging that those are reasons some women have sex, those are reasons some men have sex, but also some women are just these sexual animals and beasts, just like men, and we like the way it feels.
Absolutely.
And I think the assumption that we won't cheat has to do with the fact this erroneous notion that we don't really like sex that much. And I'll tell you, with a lot of the women I work with, I run into couples where it's in heterosexual context. The woman wants sex more than the man in at least half of the cases I see. And that can be a kind of more challenging dynamic to overcome because of gender stereotypes, because the man tends to feel emasculated, because the woman might feel like she's some sort of a Jezebel or a slut. And we're not having these conversations. And it's interesting because with your group, I don't remember the dynamics of your group, but in that type of setting, you'll often notice the guys kind of beating their chests in a performative way. Like they always want sex and they want as much as they can get.
They're just animals.
Little time together and break the group down. The guys will come out and say, like, I don't really want sex every day. I'd like it about once a week. Right. And there's a huge spectrum. Some guys want it every day. Some women want it every day. Some guys want it once a month. Some guys don't want it at all. And that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you from a virility perspective. Some people just aren't into sex.
Right. And you know what? Every relationship's been different. If I think about it, in the relationships I've been in, some have been sex every day, and some have been maybe once a month. And you know what? They were all really satisfying relationships. It was just different people, right? It was different context. Wow.
And a different time in your life too.
Yes.
If you're starting like a new business, or you're in the middle of just having a kid, or you're dealing with some sort of transition in your life, your sex drive might go down. That doesn't mean there's something wrong.
Hey, I'm raising my hand right now. So I'm just launching a new business. I've been working on it for 6 months. And it's like, this is the first time I was worried about myself. I even went to the doctors and said, hey, check my testosterone, because I'm feeling like I don't care about having sex. And this is something that's never happened before. But I'm just super focused on this business launch, right? And that's where all of my energy's going right now.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's okay. It's totally okay. Absolutely okay. Let me ask you a question. What makes for a great sex life?
I think openness to change and variety and novelty. I think everybody needs a different amount of risk, but most of us want some degree of risk and unpredictability. Some of it, I know my personality, I like a lot of change. I get bored very, very quickly. Yeah, and so I like an element of something subversive and risky. Whereas my husband, probably he still needs risk, but not as much as I do. So I think a good relationship involves finding a balance between your two degrees, your two risk factors, right? How much do you need? I think obviously open communication, which is such a broad thing to say. I would say that it depends if you're having new sex. Like if sex is only 1 to 6 months old, it's very different than sex that's 6 to 60 years old with the same person. So I think if you're in a long-term relationship, there needs to be some openness to discussing fantasies, to talking about and exploring and playing with things that perhaps you'd never do in real life. If you want to still be tearing each other's clothes off 10, 20, 30 years into the relationship, it's probably not going to work if you're just doing the same thing over and over again. And maybe you don't want to take the risk of having a threesome or going to a sex club. That's fine. But can you talk about those things? Or not necessarily those things, whatever
it is that you want to talk about. Right. So it goes back to your original statement that you should have these conversations early and often and not wait, because you could get 5 or 10 years down the road in a marriage, and then your partner brings up this subject that you had no idea was even in play, and it's shocking. And sometimes the other partner says, hell no, not ever going to be. If you want it, that's just it. Some relationships end right there, where it's like, okay, I've got 10 years into this thing and now it's done because I had this in the background and wanted to talk about it. Now we can't even talk about it. And it brings up all sorts of other things.
Yeah. And those conversations have to be ongoing, because what I might be into now might be really different than 10 years from now.
Totally.
Actually, I think that's what makes monogamy work, is the fact that we're always changing. And that if you're not open to that change, that's when again, you run into those compatibility impasses. The other thing I think matters is compatibility in terms of effort. How much effort are you each willing to put in to make your sex life work and to make it hot and make it fulfilling? Because if one of you is willing to, really push their boundaries and try new things and listen to things that perhaps aren't their cup of tea, and the other is only wanting to call the shots, the compatibility issue arises when the effort doesn't align. You both have to be willing to put in a similar amount of effort to make the relationship as well as the sex work.
Yeah. And I've been in relationships like that where the other party just didn't want to talk about anything and wasn't willing to have any discussion about anything. And it was just a closed door. And it's like, well, I got nothing to work with here. Thanks. Appreciate it. And still wonderful, wonderful person or people, and just not a fit. And you need to be that sort of fit.
Well, that's the challenge.
At least talk about it. It's challenging, but you need to talk about it.
And I think because we have tied romance and life commitment and sex together, it becomes extra challenging, because you might have someone who would be a great life partner for you, or you're wonderful together in an intimate way, but you're not necessarily wonderful together sexually. And because we've forced ourselves to put all our eggs in one person's basket and say, I need you to fulfill me as a co-parent, as a life partner, as a roommate, as a business confidant.
A lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's really unrealistic.
Yeah, totally unrealistic. So maybe you shoot for 2 out of 3.
Yeah, exactly. Or you have to look to find sources of fulfillment elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
If you want monogamy, find a partner with whom you're sexually compatible. I mean, hopefully you like them as well, but you can't have all your emotional needs, your intimate needs, your practical needs, and your sexual needs met by one person. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It can happen. If it's your case, that's fine. But I think that's a lot of pressure for a lot of people.
And you know what? And I think that it's a false belief that is something that's always going to happen. Like, people look for their soulmate. They look for the perfect relationship. And that's complete and utter bullshit in my eyes. There's no
mathematically impossible.
Right? It's impossible. Yeah. It's just impossible.
And that's a very modern, very Western notion, right? Marriage and commitment for a lifetime. First of all, we didn't used to live so damn long.
I know.
But we also didn't used to marry for romantic reasons, right? Marriage was a political, financial union. And so we have to understand that as it's evolved, we have to continue to evolve with it. You know, if you had to commit to someone for you when we used to live to be 30 or 40, that's not the same as committing to living to 90 or 100. And we're seeing more divorces in the 55 plus range, people divorcing after their kids. And people are saying, oh my gosh, how could you have made it work for 25, 30 years and now you're giving up? But there was either pressure to stay together, oftentimes. And there is a huge shift in who you are between when you were 25 and met and 55 and 85. You are different people. So you really have to be open to change. And if you ask older people, what's the key to staying together? They say, staying together. You just have to commit to being together. So I always think of the 99 rule. When I'm 99, what will I want? And I know for me, like when I'm 99, I want to be next to my husband. I like him so much. I love him.
See?
I love time with him. And so I have to let some things go, because if I won't care about, let's say he leaves his towel on the floor, or let's say he never buys me presents, or he never brings flowers, or these are actually things he doesn't do. And I don't care. Like, I don't care. If I get hung up on each of those things, when I'm 9 years old, am I going to be looking back and saying, you know what? He left his towel on the floor.
That son of a bitch left his towel on the floor. That's it.
We need to, I don't want to say lower, adjust our expectations.
Adjust the expectations, right? What's important in the relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. He makes me feel, I always say the measure of a relationship is how you feel about yourself. And he just makes me feel, first of all, so loved, but so good. Like, I just feel good about myself. I feel supported 100%. I feel safe. And I know this, one thing I love about this guy is that my husband, is that he will always grow. He will always try and make changes to grow. And the growth mindset is something he fully embraces, and I admire it so much, but I'm in awe of it. I want to be like that. So I don't know. I feel
you said it earlier. You said, hey, you know what? I'm just somebody who likes change. I don't like to keep it static, right? So it sounds like that's a pretty good match for you if your guy is the kind of guy who's like, okay, I'm willing to look and change, introspection, it's cool. It's good.
But it does not come easily to him. He doesn't like as much change. He doesn't like as much risk, but he's really willing to push his comfort zone and do things even if they don't come naturally. And that's how I think a lot of people get in a rut in their relationships. They say, oh no, I'm not into that. Or no, I'm not like that. Don't typecast yourself. Just because you didn't do something 5 years ago doesn't mean that you can't learn to do it today. Like, I'll hear people say, oh, I'm just not romantic. Okay, you know what? I'm not a particularly romantic person either. But if my partner wanted romance, it wouldn't kill me to inject a little bit of whatever they determine is romantic into the relationship.
Back to the effort. It's what you said, the effort. Yeah. And so all of that plays into a good sex life, obviously. All of those things, he makes you feel like good. You're good. That's got to make you feel like, well, I'm going to make you feel good. This is like positive.
Right. That's, I guess, the foundation of the relationship is feeling good about yourself and feeling good with your partner. However, for a lot of people, that loving, that tenderness, that kindness, the trust, that doesn't really lead to the sparks flying. And that's why I talk about risk. So you want to build the foundation. Let's say the foundation is 90 to 95% about really feeling loved and comfortable and trusting and compassionate and connected. And then, depending on your risk tolerance, you inject a little bit of risk in there.
Risky son of a gun.
And my risk might be 20%, your risk might be 1%. And that doesn't mean that mine is more exciting than you. It just means,
and there's no good or bad, right or wrong. It just is. That's what sparks you, and what sparks me is just something a little different.
And you shouldn't have to apologize for that. I know.
Oh God, I spent a whole relationship apologizing for what I liked and enjoyed.
Yeah. And on the flip side, if you're the more, let's say, tame partner, you shouldn't have to apologize for that either. Because I know my husband has felt in the past that he doesn't want to feel like the boring one. And he's not at all boring. But I don't think that I'm more fun than him. I think that I like less stability. It doesn't make me more fun. It's sometimes problematic. So, yeah, exactly. We're both okay. Your kink's not my kink, but your kink's okay, as we say.
I love that. I'm going to use that.
I don't know who said it first, so I don't know who to give it credit to.
No, that's, what, we'll give credit to whoever it was, but that's a great saying. So, Jess, I love to fish. I mean, it's been a passion of mine for a long time, but I can imagine that if I made fishing my job, I probably wouldn't like fishing as much. Is that the case with you and sex?
It's not that I don't like sex, but it has been a challenge. So talking about sex all day, hearing about other people's perspectives and challenges and insights can result in sex losing its allure. And so what I've found over the years, I think I've been doing this about a decade, is that the things that excite me have changed. So whereas the closeness and tenderness may not have been so exciting before, now I find it very exciting because it's something that's just for me and for Brandon, my husband. I also find that there's a positive side because I get to go to these sex clubs and sex resorts and he comes along. And even though we're not necessarily participating because I'm working, it creates like a fodder, a conversation, like a fantasy world for us.
Sure.
So that's a positive side. The challenge is also, sometimes if something feels good or something is working, I might for a second think about how it applies in work. Like, I should write that one down. And so I have to just bring myself down.
Brandon, hold on a second. I'm going to take a note here.
I'm not going to give you credit either.
Don't stop. Just let me I got to write this down.
So that was a problem when I'm writing books. I find that becomes a problem. But I just have some mindfulness practices to kind of bring me back to the moment. I do there was a time where I was getting a little tired of not sex for myself, but how every conversation came back to sex. Like when people find out what I do, they just want to make so many jokes. And sometimes I just want to eat my dinner and talk about the wine and the food and all the other stuff. I don't really want to talk about sex. But I think I found the balance in the last few years where I may be able to shut down those conversations or redirect them or excuse myself if I don't really feel like being a part of it. I was in the pool a couple days ago with a physician and I just met him and I joked about wanting him to look at my toenail and an injury. Like jokingly, when you meet a dentist, you're like, can you just check this out? And people, that's my norm, right? As soon as people find out what I do, they're like, I've got a really interesting case. They want to tell me their story. And they think that I'm fascinated. And it's not that I don't appreciate the sharing. But there comes a time, where I will want to talk about sports or politics or food, drink, or other things that are of interest to me other than sex. So that's more the challenge than the sex itself.
That's, it was something I was wondering about because, you talk about it all the time. If you eat spaghetti every day, pretty soon spaghetti's not going to be fun anymore, So that's cool. Good.
Why you have to switch it up and have linguine and chicken?
Right. Yeah, you can move it around a little. Right. Got it. All right, great. So let's talk about porn. What I mean, like you said earlier, it's available. How's that affecting sex and relationships? I mean, is there a negative effect?
So overall, I don't think watching porn is problematic. I think in many cases, and we have data to show that couples who watch porn, it enhances their sex life.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with porn is in the absence of comprehensive sex education, people use porn as their source of education. And that is the equivalent of watching a car chase movie and thinking you can learn how to drive, or watching Grey's Anatomy or a surgical show on TV and thinking, oh, now I know all about medicine.
Right.
I think it's just really important for all of us to remind ourselves that those are actors, there's production value there's editing, there are special effects. And that might be what sex looks like for some people, but it's probably not what sex looks, sounds, or feels like for most of us. And so whether you're an adult or you're raising a young person and you want to talk to them about the effects of porn or about porn, I think that's the most important conversation is this is fictional. These are actors. However you feel about it is fine. If you find it really hot, that's cool. If it turns you on, that's okay. If you find it off-putting, that's okay too. And the cool thing about porn, of course, is that there's a broad range of porn. So you can watch the hardcore mainstream stuff. You can watch feminist porn. You can watch real life porn on webcams. So there is, let me say this, porn is scapegoated oftentimes. And so we have an entire multi hundreds of millions of dollars industry on porn addiction. Even though porn addiction is not a diagnosis, it continues to be rejected as a formal diagnosis. The APA, the AMA, they do not recognize it. But you can make money off of telling people, it's not really your fault, it's porn's fault. Now, does that mean that porn doesn't, cause problems at times? Of course, porn can cause problems. Porn can be the symptom or it can be the issue, just like food, for example, right? Most people eat food for healthy reasons because we need it to survive. Some people,
it's emotional.
Exactly. So I think porn gets a worse rap than it deserves. I have a lot of respect for the sex workers and performers working in porn. I was talking to a woman the other day, and she was saying, I can never do anything else because I'm a porn star. She said, if I went to jail for murder, there would be programs to help me get some sort of a job. And I'm not saying that we have enough support for people who have gone to jail either. But she said, as a porn star, even if I wanted to get a job bagging groceries, as soon as somebody finds out what I do, I either get harassed or I'm run out of the place. And so there's a lot of stigma faced by sex workers and by porn performers. And I think we forget that people are just people, right? And we need to show a lot more respect and appreciation. And so many people are watching porn. Why are we so judgmental of the people who are starring in it?
Exactly. And I think probably more so for women who are starring in it.
Yes.
I would anticipate that the guys who are in porn probably don't have as much of that, but could. Maybe I'm making an assumption, but...
No, I think you're probably right. It goes back to sexuality and gender and the way... studs and we see women as sluts. And I know that's, it's something that's not my idea. It's not new, but we do need to start breaking that down. And all of us need to admit to our own biases, because I run into it myself, where I might create a hierarchy of what's appropriate, of what's valuable, of what's considered professional, but everyone is doing their job. And some people are doing a very good job of it. I was on a show the other day called Dinner with Danny. Danny Daniels is an actress, a porn star, and she has a big social media following. And I guess she and her friends would always be out for dinner. And what they found was that, they're all porn stars. So everyone's kind of listening in on their conversation. So she decided to make this show out of it. It's on Amazon. And just talking with the women, they were all women when I was there. The fact that, they can't even go to the grocery store without being judged or harassed in many cases, or having somebody whisper about them. There's no excuse for that. And you all got here because most of you got here because of sex. So let's get over it.
Yeah, what's the big deal? Everybody has sex. Most people have sex. So what's the big deal? They're just having sex. That's really what it is.
Well, we've created sex as a moral issue.
I know. Is there?
What about assault? Yeah, what about assault and addiction? And you know what? Assault occurs in so many different ways, in physical ways. For example, people physically assault one another. People emotionally assault one another. But we don't do away with all physical and all emotional, because sometimes, physical abuse can be physical or emotional, but we do that with sex. We just focus on the negative and instead of looking at the positive. And that's one thing I try and do with young people, is help them to understand, okay, so what are the potential positive outcomes of sex? And what are some of the potential negative? Because it's not all good. Of course, we do want to look at unplanned pregnancy, STIs, any sort of abuse or pressure. And so we want to look to maximize the positive and reduce the risk.
And I don't think we do that. We only talk about the negatives. So any sexual training or anything always focuses on STIs and unplanned pregnancies and and disease. So that's what's focused on. No, I don't think I've ever had anybody talk about in sex education the positive benefits. And there are a huge amount of positive benefits. Again, it goes back to health and happiness.
Of course, and those scare tactics don't do anything to stop young people from having unsafe sex.
Those they figure out it feels good. Hell yeah, I'm going to do it.
Exactly. And when we talk about pleasure, we're also talking about consent. If pleasure is the standard of what sex should entail, you want to think about both or all parties enjoying pleasure, not just doing it to do it, not doing it because you get a badge, not doing it so you can brag about it, not doing it so you can check it off your list. Like there's pressure in all directions. I heard from a 27-year-old virgin the other day, and virginity is not my favorite construct. There are issues around that, but this person has never had sex. That's how they identify. So I respect that. And they're worried that they're going to have problems because they waited too long. And that's certainly not the case either. You can decide to start having sex at 27, at 30, at 40, and that's okay too. And it's important to remember that you don't have to have sex. If you don't want to have sex, that's fine. Just don't impose your values on anyone else.
Right. Then that's it. And that's it on either side of the fence.
Exactly.
Just let everybody be who they are and what they are.
Yes.
So, Jess, you got any last thoughts? Anything you want to share with us?
I think that what we could do to revolutionize what's going on around sex right now is to learn to be a bit more selfish, to learn to say what you want, express your desires, and ask for more. Because I think sex has become more performative than it has become experiential. And we want to bring it back to being an experience that feels good for you. We see a lot of work around mindfulness and sex. I have an online course called Mindful Sex to help people just be more in their bodies. Don't worry about how long it's lasting or what you look like or how your hips are popping or how hard it is.
Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah, if you're enjoying the moment, all of those things will follow. And even if one of them doesn't for a moment, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There are so many ways to enjoy pleasure without following a specific script. And again, that's one of the problems, I think, with the messages in porn, that the penis is always hard, it's always ready to go, and there's a lot of banging, a lot of jackhammering, they let their pizza get cold on the side. I don't know what So, we just need to talk a little bit more openly, admit when we don't know something, or admit when we're uncomfortable, or, admit when we screw up. Right? Like I'll tell you, for example, I dole out advice. It's my job, but I don't always follow my own advice. I struggle with it. One thing I struggle with is initiating sex. I just love the feeling when my husband does it, but it's not fair because he wants the feeling of my coming onto him.
Yeah.
Well, and so I have to push I don't know if it's my comfort zone or just my effort. I also do my part. So just because you have the information doesn't mean that you're perfect at it. I certainly am not. I'm, always screwing up, always falling short, and then other times rising to the top and really just enjoying all of it along the way.
Mm-hmm. I love this mindfulness in sex thing because a part of what I do is mindfulness and sort of meditation training. So there's a component in there, right? And for me, like in my personal experience in the last 10 years, I've got to a point where I'll be in the moment, in the sexual moment with someone, and I will not be present in that. And I'll swear to God, I could go an hour or two no orgasm. I've actually dated women where the relationship ended because I could not have an orgasm. And I'd be, hey, honey, it's fine. I can tell you exactly how we can have an orgasm. Make it happen in like 30 seconds. But, there's always this desire, or there was a desire for the woman to feel like, okay, it was about me. You were excited about me. And it's like, just wasn't mindful of being in there. Like I'm somewhere else thinking about, am I going too long? Is it like, so it becomes this whole psychological trap, but it's, the mindfulness. I love that. I'm going to take your course, darn it. That's yeah.
Well, and if you practice mindfulness, you can probably already apply it to sex.
Yeah,
I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of men are so obsessed with lasting long that we're not talking about the fact that a lot of men also have trouble ejaculating and orgasming.
Yeah.
Right? And
it's not trouble. I mean, I can definitely make it happen. But by myself, I'm like 1 minute. I know me real well, right? But in the context of being with somebody, it's like an hour long. It's like
all women say the same thing. When guys are like, "You guys take too long," I'm like, "Let me do it myself."
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, I never thought I'd have women who would be like tapping up, like, "Oh, baby, that's it. I can't do it anymore." Yeah, okay. Well, that's not good. Yeah, or is it? Who knows? Good, bad. Who knows? But in the end, it's sex. It's healthy. It makes people happy. Huge proponent. So we're going to have all of your contact info up on the show notes. Do you want to share any website or anything in social media, whatever you want to do right now?
Yeah, I'm at Sex with Dr. Jess on all social media. And if you're interested in any of the online courses from mindful sex to lasting longer in bed to driving your partner wild, it's happiercouples.com.
Love it. Happiercouples.com. All right. So I've got a deep question from Deep Questions with Nurse Mark. And the question is this. What was the greatest lesson that you learned from either your mother or your father or the significant person in your life?
About sex or just about life?
Just about life. Like,
well, my mom is full of pearls of wisdom because we're Chinese. So there were many lessons. One of them was really consider the source. And I'm still trying to take this in. But what she means is when somebody does something to you or says something to you and it doesn't feel good, think about where they're coming from. Like this is their issue, not yours. My mom also really taught me never to judge a book by its cover. And she taught me to consider why people act the way they do. So if someone's maybe not being I remember this from being like 6 years old. If someone's not being nice to me, maybe it's because somebody in their life isn't nice to them. And so they're struggling. So my mom taught me that.
That's a good one.
Yeah, there were so many. She's probably going to be disappointed that I didn't list them all.
No, those are two great pearls right there. Those are really two great pearls. Wow. Jess, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. It was great chatting about all of the stuff that we did. And, I'm so appreciative that you took time out of your day to be here. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Lots of fun.
All right. Well, that's a wrap, folks. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. Thanks, folks, for listening into the latest episode of the Nurse Mark podcast with Dr. Jessica O'Reilly. It was really cool to sit with Dr. Jess and talk about some of the things related to sexuality, some of the things that maybe we don't discuss with the people around us. Always interesting, always fascinating. And hey, it is who we are. From the beginning to the end, sex is weaved into our society and into all of our relationships. And of course, it's related to health, happiness, cannabis. Thanks for listening.